welcome to Chore Chapters, because everyday tasks need good company. I'm Leo, and with me as always, we have got Luna.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a thrilling and interesting story lined up, so grab your headphones and let's dive straight into the story.
So we've really been digging into the files on the Patsy Wright case, and it's honestly one of the most perplexing ones we've encountered.
It really is.
We've got this whole stack of sources, news articles, old forum comments, reports on law enforcement, emergency systems back in mid-'80s Texas.
A real mix.
And our mission here really is to piece together not just the tragic events of Patsy's death and the investigation that followed,
But also to look at the sisters themselves.
exactly, to understand those critical moments and maybe the limitations of the systems at that time that, well, ultimately left this case cold for decades.
Yeah, it's a case that sort of perfectly shows how much things like technology and procedures have changed, but also how some challenges, especially the human ones, are kind of timeless in investigations.
Absolutely. And the way this whole mystery starts is just so startling. Picture it. October 23rd, 1987, really early morning, pre-dawn in Arlington, Texas. You've got Patsy Wright, 43 years old, successful, vibrant woman, just trying to get some sleep. She grabs a bottle of Nyquil, totally normal thing to do.
Something millions of people do.
But taking that medicine led to this agonizing, completely unexpected death.
And initially her death was just baffling, right?
Yeah.
A sudden collapse. She seemed healthy.
Yeah, everyone thought it must be some kind of strange, natural medical thing.
Which makes the discovery 8 days later during a routine autopsy just, wow, even more shocking.
It wasn't natural causes at all. She'd been poisoned.
And not just any poison, strychnine, which is incredibly rare and just a horrific way to die.
The medical examiner, Dr. Mark Krause, his reaction tells you everything. He apparently called the lead investigator and said, "Are you sitting down? I haven't seen anything like this in 20 years.
Wow. Yeah. That call, that one piece of information, it just instantly changed everything from a weird death to a deliberate, calculated murder.
Precisely. And it brings up the huge question. How did pure powdered strychnine get into Patsy Wright's personal bottle of Nyquil?
And why, even after finding the poison, is this case still unsolved, more than 30 years later?
So this deep dive, it isn't just about trying to figure out who might have done it. It's also looking at how the systems that were supposed to handle this back in 1987 Texas, the 911 dispatch, the forensics, the police investigation itself, how they dealt with such an unusual crime.
And maybe where those systems fell short in this specific instance.
Before we get into the actual night she died, I think it's really important to understand who Patsy Wright was. Her life story gives so much context here.
Definitely. She was quite a figure.
Patsy Bolton Wright, 43, a millionaire, moved in Dallas-Fort Worth society circles, but also, by all accounts, a really sharp, hands-on businesswoman.
Right. She co-owned the Southwest Historical Wax Museum in Grand Prairie. Her sister, Sally Horning, was her partner.
Big business, too, reportedly worth around $6 million. And Patsy was actively expanding it, planning a new museum down in San Antonio.
And she came from, well, Texas royalty almost. Grandniece of House Speaker Sam Rayburn, daughter of a powerful kind of autocratic oilman.
But friends described her as way more than just her background or money. Vibrant, blonde, a real head-turner, they said. Wide smile, easy laugh.
Moved easily between those different worlds, high society and the horse-cutting scene.
Oh, yeah, the horses. That was clearly a huge passion. She was a champion rider, and she just dropped, $26,000 on a horse named Dry Leo.
A serious investment.
And this is key, I think. She was actively building this whole new future for herself. Just bought a 30-acre ranch out in Aledo, put the down payment on it.
Planning to live there alone with her horses.
Exactly. Apparently, friends were a bit worried about her living alone, but she was excited, ready for this new chapter.
So when you look at all the plans, the energy, the passion projects, the idea of suicide just seems off.
Completely off. Everyone who knew her dismissed it right away. It just didn't fit who she was or where she was going.
Okay, so circling back to the people in her life.
Yeah.
We need to talk about the key figures who really factor into this whole mystery.
Right. There's her sister and business partner, Sally Horning, and Sally's husband, Steve Horning.
And sources suggest Patsy's relationship with Steve, her brother-in-law, was, let's say, strained.
Yeah, reports say she saw him as financially irresponsible. worried about his influence on the museum business, especially because Sally had recently battled cancer, though she was in remission at the time.
A potential point of tension there. And then there's her second ex-husband, Robert Bob Cox.
Their divorce sounds like it was really rough. There are reports Patsy even sought a restraining order against him for harassment.
Okay, and here's where the timing gets just incredibly significant.
Unbelievably so. At the exact time Patsy died, Bob Cox was smack in the middle of an insurance fraud trial.
About his own wax museum, which had burned down.
Yes. And Patsy was scheduled to testify against him in just a couple of days.
And she apparently had, quote, unflattering information, and wasn't going to lie for him about something he claimed was destroyed in the fire.
So her death literally removed the main witness against him in that trial.
And the fact is, after she died, Bob Cox won his lawsuit, got $1.3 million from the insurance company.
That's about as strong a potential motive as you can get, right?
It's certainly powerful circumstantial evidence. Okay, before we trace the events of that awful night, let's quickly set the scene regarding the systems in place back then. 1987 Texas.
Yeah, because law enforcement, emergency response, they were evolving, but they weren't what we have today. Not even close in some ways.
Take Arlington PD. They were modernizing, sure, going for accreditation, planning a new station, but detective work, still very much reliant on traditional skills.
Interviews, observation, building cases piece by piece, gut feelings maybe.
Exactly. DNA profiling was basically science fiction for a local PD back then. It just wasn't a routine tool.
And surveillance cameras everywhere, forget it. Maybe some banks or specific private businesses, but not like today.
Then there's the forensic side, specifically toxicology. The Tarrant County ME's office had made some recent upgrades. They added toxes and histology labs in '86.
And they had some advanced gear for the time, like this GCMS machine.
Right, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. Basically a super sophisticated chemical analyzer.
It separates tiny components in a sample, like blood or tissue, and identifies exactly what they are. Even complex stuff like poisons.
It was high-tech for an ME's office in '87. Cost like $100,000, which was a lot of money then.
And that machine turned out to be critical in this case. But, the standard process for an unexplained death was autopsy, maybe an inquest.
But if you didn't know what you're looking for, like a really rare poison,
those initial exams could easily miss it. You needed that specific, specialized toxicology work with the fancy machine, and that took time.
Okay, and then there's the emergency dispatch piece. This is really crucial to the timeline.
Hugely important. So the Tarrant County 911 district was approved in '85, but enhanced 911 E911.
The one that promised automatic location identification, ALI, and number identification, ANI.
That had just gone live in Tarrant County, including Arlington, on August 1st, 1987.
Less than 3 months before Patsy died. Brand spanking new.
E911 was supposed to be the magic bullet, right? Call 911, dispatcher instantly knows who you are and where you are.
That was the promise. But here's the potential catch with any brand new system like that, especially one relying on databases.
Those databases pulled from phone company records.
Right. And they might not have been perfectly up to the minute. Think about someone who just moved, got a new phone line.
Or like Patsy was living in a temporary rental house.
Exactly. There could easily be a lag in getting that new address information into the system.
Which creates this potential gap, right? Between what the tech promised and how it actually worked in a specific real-world, maybe slightly unusual situation.
And that gap, well, it seems like it had absolutely devastating consequences on the night Patsy died.
Let's walk through those hours. It's the night of October 22nd, 1987. Patsy gets back to her rental house on Holyoke Street in Arlington.
She'd been at a rehearsal for a Halloween event at the museum, then had that 2-hour drive home. Remember, this wasn't her forever home, just temporary before the ranch move.
Sources say she was feeling restless, couldn't sleep. Apparently, that wasn't unusual for her.
So she did what she often did, reached for her bottle of NyQuil.
And this is just chilling. That bottle of NyQuil had been tampered with. It contained pure powdered strychnine.
The killer clearly knew her habits, knew she took NyQuil, and used this common medicine, probably thinking the strong taste of NyQuil itself would mask the really intense bitterness of the strychnine.
It's diabolical, really.
And strychnine, as we said, it worked fast and it's brutal. attacks the central nervous system, causes these unbearable convulsions.
Death usually comes from suffocation because the muscles seize up or just sheer exhaustion from the seizures. It's known as a particularly cruel poison.
Okay, so around 3:04 a.m., the phone rings at Sally and Steve Horning's house. Steve answers first, then Sally gets on.
And it's Patsy. Her voice is faint. She's clearly struggling to speak. She manages to say, "I've taken some NyQuil and something's really, really wrong."
And then the line goes dead. She collapsed.
Oh, God. So Sally immediately calls Arlington PD, begging for an ambulance for her sister.
And this is where that brand new E911 system seems to fail them.
Critically, Sally didn't know the exact street address of Patsy's new rental house off the top of her head.
And according to the reports, the dispatcher told her they couldn't send an ambulance without a precise confirmed address.
Just think about that for a second. Here's Patsy, likely in the throes of strychnine poisoning, needing help immediately.
And the system designed to automatically provide her location fails. Maybe the address wasn't in the database yet. Maybe Sally, calling from her own house, messed with the ALI. Whatever the reason.
The dispatcher follows protocol, needs that verbal address confirmation, and help is delayed. Precious minutes are ticking by.
So with the ambulance basically on hold, Sally and Steve jump in their car and race over to Patsy's house themselves.
Apparently, they were in such a panic, they even backed into another car leaving their place.
They get there, find the front door locked. Sally doesn't have a key. And there's that little unsettling detail, Patsy's spare keys, the ones she usually kept hidden over the double oven. They'd recently gone missing.
Weird. So Steve manages to find a bedroom window that's slightly ajar. He crawls through it, gets inside, and unlocks the front door for Sally.
Inside, they find Patsy. She's in the master bedroom, on her waterbed, wearing pink pajamas. Her eyes are open, but vacant.
They also notice her burglar alarm hadn't been set. She'd had one installed after some previous incident, but it wasn't on that night.
According to Steve's later account, he saw a table near the bed. On it were 2 dinner plates.
Right, the infamous dinner plates.
He says he moved the table with the plates away from the bed and then attempted CPR on Patsy.
While he's doing that, Sally is finally able to get the correct address and calls for an ambulance again.
But see, their actions, completely understandable because they were trying to save her due to the initial dispatch failure.
They inevitably altered the scene. Moving the table, attempting CPR, things that happened before police or medics could document everything exactly as it was found.
And that detail about the 2 dinner plates becomes this huge point of speculation later.
Definitely. Did she have a visitor for dinner? Her known boyfriend was hours away in Austin.
So was there maybe a secret lover? Someone nobody knew about who could have been the killer?
Or, as some online commenters argue, could Patsy have just used 2 plates herself? Maybe for different parts of a meal, or maybe she just did that sometimes, where there are 2 sets of forks, glasses. We don't know for sure.
It's a key detail that's just ambiguous, and it could point towards a totally different suspect or mean nothing at all.
So paramedics finally arrive. One named Randy Jones later said there wasn't much they could do by then. No pulse, no blood pressure, her eyes were dilating.
They transported her to Arlington Memorial Hospital,
Where she was pronounced dead at 4:15 a.m. An initial autopsy was done, but without an obvious cause, it was logged as just a tragic, unexplained natural death.
and an Arlington PD patrolman, Patrick Bridges, just following routine procedure for an unattended death.
Collected that NyQuil bottle from the bathroom counter, bagged it as potential evidence, but nobody knew yet just how crucial or deadly it was.
And this leads us to the second major systemic issue, that delay in figuring out it was poison.
Absolutely critical delay. Patsy was actually buried, her death believed to be just a very sad medical event.
The case file lands on CJDJ Gustafson's desk. It's flagged as suspicious, maybe, but it's not officially a homicide investigation yet because there's no known cause of death pointing to foul play.
8 days go by. 8 agonizing days, in retrospect.
And then the call comes. Dr. Mark Krause from the Tarrant County ME's office phones G.J. Gustafson. They'd run the toxicology screen using that GCMS machine.
And Patsy's blood lit up. A violent positive reaction was the phrase used.
For strychnine. And that's when Krause delivers that line. Are you sitting down? I haven't seen anything like this in 20 years.
Imagine getting that call. That 8-day delay, though, it was just catastrophic for the investigation.
Absolutely. For over a week, nobody treated it as a murder. The scene wasn't processed with that level of scrutiny. Evidence could have been lost, degraded, contaminated.
Witnesses weren't interviewed with the gravity of a murder investigation hanging over them.
And maybe most importantly, whoever did this had an 8-day head start before the police even knew they were looking for a killer.
It's a huge handicap right from the
Yes.
beginning.
So with poison confirmed, suicide was immediately off the table. Everyone who knew Patsy, her personality, her future plans, said no way.
The FBI even looked into product tampering. Like the Tylenol murders a few years earlier. That was a big fear back then.
Right, but they checked the manufacturing, the retail chain, and concluded the bottle itself wasn't tampered with before Patsy bought it.
No, the pure powdered strychnine was added directly to her personal bottle at her home.
Which leads to the chilling, unavoidable conclusion. This was a targeted murder. By someone who had access to her house, knew her habits well enough to know she took NyQuil.
One of her friends, Karen Beatty, later said she felt like Patsy was trying to give clues in that final, desperate phone call. She believed the killer knew Patsy intimately.
And that left Segtik Gustafsson with this incredibly tough case. Compromised scene, huge delay, and now delving into this complex web of Patsy's relationships, business dealings, potential enemies.
As D Magazine put it, the clues seem to lead everywhere and nowhere.
The focus naturally narrowed down to those closest to her who might have had a reason to want her gone.
And one of the primary suspects became her brother-in-law, Steve Horning.
The motive there seemed pretty clear, at least on paper. Financial gain. Patsy's share of that multi-million-dollar wax museum business, about $3 million, was set to go to his wife, Sally, which would, of course, benefit him too.
Plus, there were those reports we mentioned about Patsy thinking he was bad with money and worrying about his influence on the business, especially with Sally's health history.
Sally, Patsy's sister, reportedly passed her polygraph test. Steve's first one was apparently inconclusive. He did pass his second one, though.
Still, you see a lot of online discussion, speculation, focusing on Steve's actions that night. Moving the plates, doing CPR on someone poisoned by strychnine. Was it panic or something more calculated?
It's hard to say. On the flip side, you could argue they didn't try to hide the NyQuil bottle. It was just left there in the bathroom for police to find. Does that point to innocence? Or maybe it was a clever bluff?
Then, of course, there's the other main suspect, the second ex-husband, Robert Bob Cox.
And the motive for Cox seems twofold, right? Financial, definitely related to that trial, but also maybe animosity, retaliation from that really bitter divorce where she had sought a restraining order.
But the timing is just... it's impossible to ignore. She was literally days away from testifying against him in a trial that could cost him over $1 million.
Information that would directly contradict his claims, and she refused to lie for him.
And poof, she dies, he wins the lawsuit, gets $1.3 million.
Cox also didn't do himself any favors in terms of suspicion. He flat out refused to take a polygraph test.
And was generally uncooperative with the police investigation.
Plus, you have those claims from friends, alleged threats he made, like he knew people who could get someone snuffed out, or that he'd ruin her. Even a therapist reportedly called him a sociopath.
But, back in 1987, turning all that, the strong motive, the timing, the alleged threats, into enough hard evidence to charge someone with murder, especially with him not cooperating.
Very difficult. Without DNA, without maybe digital evidence we'd have today, without a confession. It's a tough circumstantial case to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
And hanging over all this is that mystery of the 2 dinner plates Steve Horning said he found.
Right. If it wasn't just Patsy eating alone, it implies she had company that night.
Company who wasn't her known boyfriend. So who was it? Was it someone completely unknown to the investigation? Could they be the killer?
It just adds another layer of uncertainty to an already complex picture.
And adding even more complexity, maybe even shadows. Are these other strange events that might be linked? Or might not be?
Yeah, first there's the death of Lori-Ann Williams. She was a young receptionist, 26, at Patsy's museum. She died mysteriously back in 1984. Cause of death, undetermined.
After Patsy was murdered with poison, naturally suspicions arose about Lori-Ann's death too. Could she also have been poisoned?
Her body was actually exhumed. A private investigator involved, Bill Deere, publicly speculated about arsenic poisoning.
But 2 independent labs tested her remains, and the results were inconclusive.
Poisons can metabolize, break down over time, especially after embalming. And again, 1980s testing wasn't as sensitive as it is now.
So it was this tantalizing hint of a possible pattern, maybe connected to that horse trainer. Some sources mentioned dated both women. But ultimately, no proof, just more questions.
Then, less than a year after Patsy's murder, September 1988, The Southwest Historical Wax Museum in Grand Prairie burns to the ground.
A massive fire, and it was ruled arson.
The Dallas Morning News had just called it America's largest wax museum that year. This wasn't a small incident.
Burning down a multi-million-dollar asset directly linked to an unsolved poisoning murder. That's a gigantic red flag, isn't it?
Huge. And the fact that this major arson also remains unsolved, it suggests either the person behind it was very, very careful, maybe sophisticated.
Or that the investigative system in '88 was just overwhelmed, or maybe didn't have the resources or tools to crack such a complex, possibly connected crime. What was the motive? Destroying records, insurance fraud by the remaining owners, a violent message. We just don't know.
And there was a guy briefly connected to the arson, Stanley Lester Pointer.
Right. He got caught trying to steal a ledger from the ashes of the museum just 2 weeks after the fire. Had a prior arson arrest.
He was looked at as a suspect, naturally, for the arson and maybe even Patsy's murder.
But again, not enough evidence to hold him. And then a few years later, 1991, Dallas police try to re-question him about something else entirely.
He tries to run, gets into a confrontation, and is shot and killed by police.
So whatever he might have known about the arson, or Patsy, it died with him. Another dead end.
It really underscores how challenging investigations were back then, without the tools we take for granted now.
Yeah, police work in the '80s relied so heavily on interviews, and good detectives were skilled at the art of the interview, no doubt.
But things like polygraphs. Even if someone took one and failed, it wasn't admissible in court. And crucially, people like Bob Cox could just refuse to take one, and there wasn't much investigators could do about it.
And no routine DNA testing, very little CCTV, no digital forensics to trace communications or movements.
It meant cases often came down to getting a confession or building such an overwhelming circumstantial case that a jury felt convinced.
And if a killer was careful, didn't leave obvious fingerprints or witnesses, didn't confess, they had a much better shot at getting away with it than they might today.
As the official investigation stalled, Patsy's family, understandably desperate for answers, turned to a resource many families used back then.
Unsolved mysteries. The Robert Stack era.
Exactly. They actually participated in filming a reenactment segment in April 1989. They hoped putting it on national TV might shake loose a new lead, jog someone's memory.
The segment aired probably multiple times over the years, as those shows often did. It definitely brought attention to the case.
But unfortunately, while it generated calls, most were apparently from psychics or, armchair detectives offering theories. Nothing concrete that investigators could really use.
So despite that national exposure, the case remained cold, unsolved.
Looking back at everything, you can really see several key points where the systems in place in 1987 just struggled with this specific crime.
Yeah, you can pinpoint the breakdowns, almost.
That initial 911 dispatch failure is glaring. The brand new E911 system couldn't locate Patsy's temporary home automatically, leading to that crucial delay.
A delay that forced the family to intervene, altering the scene and possibly costing precious time for medical help.
Then the 8-day wait for the toxicology results. Identifying the poison was key, but that delay meant the crucial early hours and days of the investigation were lost. The scene wasn't treated as homicide. Evidence wasn't collected with that urgency.
The killer got a huge head start.
Add to that just the general limitations of forensic tech back then. No DNA databases, no CCTV ubiquity, limited ways to trace physical evidence compared to now.
And the inability to force cooperation. Key suspects like Bob Cox could refuse polygraphs, clam up, and investigators had fewer tools to work around that lack of cooperation to build a solid case.
And finally, the fact that these other clearly related events like that massive museum arson also went unsolved. It suggests the whole situation might have just been too complex, too messy for the systems to handle effectively at that point in time.
It's frustrating, but it is worth mentioning briefly how much these specific systems have improved since 1987.
Oh, absolutely. Emergency dispatch, E911, and now next generation 911, they're vastly more sophisticated. Location accuracy is way better. There are more data sources. They're designed precisely to avoid the kind of address problem Patsy's case highlighted. Texas 911 systems got major upgrades after this era.
And forensic toxicology. Huge leaps. Faster results, much more sensitive tests, wider screening for different substances, plus stricter accreditation standards for labs.
And think about cold case work today. Dedicated units. CODIS, the national DNA database that can link suspects to crimes across the country. using DNA profiles.
And the really new stuff, like investigative genetic genealogy, using DNA from crime scenes, even tiny amounts from decades ago, to potentially find suspects through distant relatives in public genealogy databases.
Tools that were pure science fiction in 1987. And they do offer hope for solving old cases, maybe even this one, if usable evidence still exists somewhere.
But for Patsy Wright, that progress came too late. Her murder and that bizarre museum arson are still officially listed as unsolved cold cases in Arlington.
And for her family, her friends, that means decades of not knowing. No answers, no final justice.
It's just a really stark, tragic reminder, isn't it, that even with systems trying to do the right thing, individual failures, or just the inherent limitations of the technology and procedures of a particular era can have these irreversible consequences.
Yeah. It shows how justice can sometimes depend not just on the facts, but on when the crime occurred and what tools were available to investigate it.
So when you consider everything, the unique poison, that incredibly suspicious timing with the trial, the web of strained relationships, the unsolved arson that followed, does this case point to a killer who was just incredibly lucky? Or maybe incredibly cunning?
Or maybe just someone who benefited from a system that at that specific moment wasn't quite equipped to untangle the full complexity of their crime. And you have to wonder, with all the advancements since 1987, could the answer still be out there, waiting to be found in an old evidence box?
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care and keep your chores company.